"You're a nice guy, Damien, but let's be real, you can't afford me." That's exactly what she said, not in private, not in a text. Veronica stood up at the head of the table, tapping a silver spoon against her champagne flute until the entire patio went silent. 20 people, her family, her friends, her father's business partners, stopped talking. The California evening breeze was rustling through the grapevines of this rented Napa Valley estate, but it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the valley. She looked at me, then looked at her father, Harold, who was swirling his wine with a look of pure, unadulterated smugness. "I think we've all been polite long enough," Veronica announced, her voice steady, practiced. She smoothed the front of her white silk dress. "Damien, us, it's just not realistic anymore. Look around. This is the life I'm building. And you're sweet. You really are. But you're dragging me down to a tax bracket I have no intention of visiting." Her cousin Jessica snickered, actually snickered, a harsh, wet sound that cut through the silence. I sat there gripping my fork, feeling the heat rise up my neck. It wasn't just the rejection. It was the ambush. We had been here for 4 days. 4 days of her family treating me like the help, making cracks about my cute little research job, and my beat-up Honda CR-V. And now the grand finale, a public execution to prove to Daddy that she was ready to get serious about her future. "Don't look so shocked," she added, tossing her hair back. "You knew this was temporary. You had to know. I need a partner, Damien, a power player, not someone I'd have to explain the wine menu to." Harold leaned forward, his face flushed with expensive Cabernet and arrogance. "She's doing you a favor, son. Cut the dead weight now before you drown trying to keep up. Take the bus back to Oakland. I'll even cover the ticket." He threw a $100 bill onto the tablecloth. It landed right next, to the artisanal butter. Greasy, insulting, perfect. That was the moment. The point where a lesser version of me would have flipped the table or cried. Instead, I felt this cold, calm clarity wash over me. It was like the noise of the party faded out, replaced by a low, steady hum in my ears. They thought they were discarding a broke nobody. They had no idea they were spitting in the face of the guy who could buy and sell their entire debt-ridden wine distribution empire 3 times over before breakfast. I looked at the $100 bill, looked at Veronica, who was already turning away to laugh with her maid of honor. Dismissal complete. "You're right," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I don't belong here." I pulled out my phone. 1 text, 5 words. "Extract me, package alpha now." Then I picked up my drink, downed it, and waited for the rotors. "My name is Damien. I'm 31, and I don't work in biotech research support, which is what I've been telling people for 3 years. I founded a proprietary AI algorithm for drug discovery, specifically for identifying novel therapeutic compounds in record time. We revolutionized the pharmaceutical pipeline for treating neurodegenerative diseases. I sold the majority stake in Neural Path Therapeutics to a pharmaceutical giant 2 years ago for $85 million. I kept a board seat and enough equity to keep me comfortable for several lifetimes. Money is weird. It ruins things. It rots people from the inside out. I learned that the hard way in my 20s. You walk into a bar wearing a Patek Philippe, and suddenly everyone loves your jokes. You drive a Tesla, and women who wouldn't look at you twice are suddenly soulmates. It's hollow, it's lonely. You never know who's there for you and who's there for the lifestyle. So I went underground. I drive a 2018 Honda CR-V with a dent in the bumper. I rent a decent but unassuming apartment in Oakland, though I own a penthouse in Soma that most people will never see. I wear t-shirts without logos, mostly Hanes. I wanted to see who would stick around for me. Just Damien, the guy who likes Vietnamese po, terrible sci-fi movies, and hiking in Marine on weekends. Then I met Veronica. We met at a dog park in Berkeley 9 months ago. She was walking a French bulldog that cost more than my first car, a reality I kept to myself. I was walking a mutt I rescued named Buster. She was struggling to open a poop bag, her manicured nails making it impossible to tear the plastic. I helped her. We talked. She was funny, sharp, a little pretentious, sure, but I thought maybe that was just a defense mechanism. She worked in PR for a mid-tier fashion label, not high up, but enough to think she was Anna Wintour reincarnated. We dated for 10 months, and for 10 months, I played the role perfectly. The supportive middle-class boyfriend, I paid for dinners, but I checked the prices visibly, wincing at anything over $40. I saved up for special dates. I listened to her complain about how expensive the Bay Area was, while secretly knowing I could buy half the neighborhoods she coveted. I thought we were happy. I really did. But the red flags were there from month 6 onward, like our anniversary dinner. I bought her a heartfelt handwritten letter and a vintage locket I found at a flea market in Berkeley. It wasn't expensive, but it was unique, with intricate Art Deco engravings. She opened it, looked at it for exactly 3 seconds, and said, "Oh, cute." Then she asked if I had kept the receipt. Not that I don't love it, but maybe we could exchange it for something more practical. Or the time my car broke down on the way to her friend's wedding in Sonoma. I called her, stranded on Highway 101, apologetic and asking if she could pick me up. She didn't ask if I was okay. She screamed at me for ruining her entrance. "This is why you need a real car, Damien. It's embarrassing to be seen in this junk heap. Everyone's going to think I'm dating down." I brushed it off. I told myself she was just stressed about work, about her rent, about her father's expectations. I told myself she was ambitious, and that pushed me to be better. I didn't realize she was keeping a scorecard, marking down every perceived failure, every moment I didn't meet her ever-escalating standards. I was losing points every single day, and the game was rigged from the start. The invite to Napa came 3 weeks ago, delivered with a mixture of excitement and anxiety that should have been my final warning. Harold was renting this massive wine estate for his 60th birthday week, a celebration he'd borrowed heavily to afford, though I wouldn't learn the full extent of his financial precariousness until later. "I want you to come," Veronica had said, eyes pleading but with an undertone of warning. "But maybe dress up a bit. Dad is particular about first impressions." Particular was an understatement. Harold Kingsley was a mid-tier wine distributor who acted like he owned half of Napa Valley. What I didn't know then, but would discover through my own background research, was that he was leveraged to his eyeballs, borrowing against future contracts to maintain the lifestyle his daughter expected. He was a master of smoke and mirrors, playing the part of the wine mogul perfectly while walking a financial tightrope. Tuesday was the arrival, and the drive up became the first nightmare. Veronica refused to ride in my Honda. "It smells like wet dog, Damien. We're taking the Tesla." So we took her leased Model 3, which she treated like it was a Lamborghini. When we arrived at the estate, the judgment started before I even shouldered my duffel bag. Harold met us in the circular driveway, wearing crisp linen pants and holding a wine glass like it was a scepter. He looked like Central Casting's idea of a California wine snob, all affectation and no substance. "So this is the guy," Harold said, not offering his hand. His eyes swept me from head to toe, lingering disapprovingly on my sneakers. "Veronica says you're in biotech." "Research," I said, keeping my voice neutral and slightly deferential. "Back-end support. I make sure the data flows properly between labs, computers mostly." Harold sniffed. "Aight, guy, got it. Well, try not to bore the guests with tech talk. We have some heavy hitters coming this weekend, real players in the wine industry." The implication was clear. Don't embarrass my daughter. He didn't even bother showing me where to put my bag. The actual staff, he'd hired a full crew for the week, another expense he couldn't afford, had to point me toward the guest cottage, not the main house where Veronica would be staying. The cottage was essentially a converted pool house near the filtration equipment, complete with the constant hum of motors and the smell of chlorine. "Daddy wants me close," Veronica explained when I raised an eyebrow. "It's tradition. Family stays in the main house during celebrations." I wasn't family. The message was received. Wednesday brought the wine tasting disaster. Harold insisted on a full tour of the vineyard, though it quickly became apparent this was less about education and more about establishing pecking order. For 2 hours I listened to him and his friends discuss notes and terroir and mouthfeel like they were decoding the human genome. "So, Damien," said Julian, a hedge fund analyst who was clearly angling for Veronica's attention. "She tells me you rent in Oakland. Interesting choice. Most tech guys I know are in Palo Alto or San Francisco. You like the authenticity?" The word dripped with condescension. Julian was everything Harold wanted for his daughter. BMW, Rolex, the kind of confidence that comes from inherited wealth rather than earned success. "I like the neighborhood," I replied. "It's real, good Vietnamese food, actual diversity. You know how it is." "Real?" Harold laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Now that's code for cheap. Look, son, there's no shame in being poor. My generation had to claw our way up too. Just don't drag my daughter down with you. She's got potential. She needs a platform, not an anchor. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. I wanted to tell him that I could buy his entire operation, pay off his debts, and still have enough left over to purchase the vineyard he was pretending to own, but I didn't. I needed to see exactly how deep their contempt ran. Thursday morning, I became invisible. Veronica barely acknowledged my existence, too busy laughing at Julian's stories by the pool. I brought her coffee the way she likes it. Oat milk, 2 stevia packets, a dash of cinnamon. She took it without looking at me. Thanks, just put it on the table. Julian's showing me photos from his trip to Morocco. Did you know he has a house in Marrakesh? I stood there for a moment, waiting for a smile, a touch, any acknowledgement that I was more than hired help. Nothing came. Babe, I started. Not now, Damien, she snapped, not breaking eye contact with Julian's phone screen. God, you're so needy lately. Go find something to do. Maybe help in the kitchen. I walked away down through the vineyard rows, past the workers tending the vines with more dignity than I was receiving from my girlfriend of 10 months. I sat on a stone wall that probably cost more than most people's cars and pulled out my phone. My investment portfolio showed numbers that would make Julian's hedge fund look like a lemonade stand. I could fly to Morocco right now. I could buy a house in Marrakesh before dinner. And yet, here I was, being dismissed like a servant by a woman who thought she was doing me a favor by dating down. That's when it crystallized. She didn't love me. She tolerated me while waiting for an upgrade. Julian, with his leased luxury car and trust fund swagger, was that upgrade. I could see the calculation in her eyes every time she looked at him, then back at me. The comparison was never in my favor. I made the decision sitting on that wall, watching the sun set over vineyards that Harold couldn't actually afford. I wasn't going to break up with her. I was going to let her do it. I was going to let her reveal exactly who she was, in front of everyone who mattered to her. The public humiliation would be mutual, but only one of us would deserve it. Thursday night arrived with all the pomp Harold could muster. The white party, everyone dressed in white, because subtlety was apparently not a Kingsley family trait. I had to drive to a local Target to buy a white linen shirt that felt like sandpaper and made me look like a waiter at a beach resort. We sat down at 8:30 sharp. The table was a masterpiece of pretension, hand-blown crystals, silverware that probably cost more per place setting than my monthly rent, and centerpieces of white orchids flown in from some exotic location Harold would mention at least 3 times during dinner. 20 guests, all dressed in varying shades of white, all playing their parts in Harold's elaborate theater of success. I was seated at the far end, between Harold's deaf Aunt Meredith and a teenager named Brittany, who spent the entire evening scrolling TikTok with the sound off. Veronica was positioned at the head of the table, right next to Harold, in the place of honor reserved for the daughter he was so proud to show off. Julian sat to her left, close enough that their conversations looked intimate from my distant vantage point. The menu was ridiculous. Dungeness crab with microgreens, caviar service with mother-of-pearl spoons, Wagyu beef that Harold announced cost $200 per pound. Each course came with a wine pairing and a lecture about vintage and provenance that made my teeth ache. I ate quietly, watching the performance, noting how Veronica laughed just a little too loudly at Julian's jokes, how she kept glancing at me with what I now recognized as embarrassment rather than affection. During the appetizer course, I caught fragments of their conversation. Julian was describing his apartment in Russian Hill, his weekend house in Tahoe, his recent ski trip to Gstaad. Veronica hung on every word like he was reciting poetry. When she did look my way, it was with the expression you'd reserve for a stain on your shirt, something unfortunate you hoped no one else would notice. The breaking point came between the salad and the main course. Harold stood up, wine glass in hand, clearly about to deliver one of his speeches. But before he could speak, Veronica rose as well. She had that look I'd seen before, determined, slightly manic, like she'd been building up courage all evening. Actually, Dad, before you toast, I have something to say. She picked up her spoon and began tapping it against her glass. The crystal rang out clear and sharp, cutting through the dinner conversation like a blade. 20 faces turned toward her, expectant and curious. The California evening was perfect. 75 degrees, a soft breeze carrying the scent of jasmine and wine country affluence. Under different circumstances, it would have been romantic. Instead, it felt like standing before a firing squad. "I think we've all been polite long enough," Veronica began, her voice carrying that practiced confidence I'd once found attractive. Now, it just sounded calculating. "Some of you have been asking about Damien and me, wondering about our future together." She paused, letting the suspense build like the amateur dramatics major she'd been in college. "The truth is, there isn't one. Not the kind you're thinking anyway." She looked directly at me, and I saw something cold and foreign in her eyes. "Damien, you're a nice guy. You really are. But let's be realistic about what this has been. What we've been." I felt my hands go still on my fork. Around the table, conversations died completely. Even Brittany looked up from her phone. "You can't afford me," she continued, each word precise and deliberate. "You can't afford this life, this world, the things I need to be happy. And I'm tired of pretending that love is enough to bridge that gap, because it isn't. Money matters, status matters. Partnership means building something together, not one person constantly pulling the other up." Jessica, her cousin, actually applauded. A few other guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. This was Veronica's show, and they were all complicit audience members. "Look around," she gestured to the estate, the table, the life Harold had constructed on borrowed credit. "This is what I'm building toward. And you?" She looked at me with something approaching pity. "You're sweet, but you're dragging me down to a tax bracket I have no intention of visiting." Harold leaned forward, his face flushed with wine and vindication. "She's doing you a favor, son. Cut the dead weight now, before you drown trying to keep up. Take the bus back to Oakland. Hell, I'll even cover the ticket." He pulled out his wallet with a theatrical flourish and threw a $100 bill onto the table. It landed right in the artisanal butter, the Abraham Lincoln side getting thoroughly greased. That was the moment, the exact second when something shifted inside me, like tumblers falling into place in a lock. They thought they were discarding a broke nobody. They had no idea they were humiliating someone who could buy and sell Harold's entire leveraged empire before the check cleared. I looked at that $100 bill, more money than I'd spent on lunch in months, not because I couldn't afford better, but because I chose simplicity. I looked at Veronica, already turning away to accept congratulations from Julian like she'd just announced her engagement to royalty. I looked at Harold, smug and satisfied, playing the protective father while his own financial house of cards teetered on the edge of collapse. "You're right," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "I don't belong here." I pulled out my phone. One text to Finn, my head of security. 5 words. "Extract me. Package Alpha now." Then I stood up, walked to the bar cart, and poured myself 3 fingers of Harold's Reserve Cabernet. The bottle he'd been saving for a special occasion, the one he'd explicitly told me was off limits to guests. It tasted like victory and pending justice. "What are you doing?" Harold barked, half rising from his chair. "Put that down and get out. You're making a scene." "I'm waiting for my ride," I said calmly, leaning against the patio railing with the wine glass in my hand. "Your Uber?" Julian laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "What's the surge pricing like out here? Might want to check your budget." I checked my watch. Finn was nothing, if not efficient. "Not exactly," I replied. Then they heard it. Thwop, thwop, thwop. A low vibration at first, barely perceptible over the evening sounds of the vineyard. But it grew quickly, rattling the crystal on the table and sending ripples across the wine glasses. The wind picked up suddenly, whipping the carefully arranged white linens and sending the orchestrated perfection of Harold's dinner party into chaos. "What the hell is that?" Harold yelled, instinctively covering his reserve Cabernet as napkins took flight like ghostly birds. A dark shape crested the hills beyond the vineyard, its navigation lights cutting through the twilight like red and green stars. It wasn't just any helicopter. It was a Bell 429, sleek and black, with the kind of custom modifications that screamed serious money. The logo on the tail was subtle, painted in matte gray. Neural Path Holdings, my holding company. The pilot brought it in low over the estate's manicured lawn, the downdraft turning the white party into a windblown disaster. Centerpieces toppled, someone's toupee made a bid for freedom, and Veronica's perfectly styled hair became a tornado of blonde chaos. The Noise was thunderous, drowning out Harold's protests and reducing the sophisticated dinner to primal shouting. The aircraft settled onto the grass with military precision, its rotors still turning, ready for immediate departure. The side door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, and Finn emerged, not in a chauffeur's uniform, but in tactical gear, looking like he was extracting a diplomat from a war zone, which, in a way, he was. I finished Harold's wine in one long swallow, savoring both the vintage and the moment. I placed the crystal glass on the railing with deliberate care, the clink somehow audible even over the helicopter's roar. "That's my ride," I announced to the assembled crowd. I walked past the table where 20 faces stared in various stages of shock, confusion, and dawning realization. Veronica looked like someone had just explained quantum physics to her in ancient Greek. Her mouth was open, her eyes fixed on the aircraft, then on me, trying to reconcile the broke boyfriend with the man who just summoned $8 million worth of helicopter to crash her father's party. Julian's face was particularly satisfying to watch. As a hedge fund analyst, he recognized wealth when he saw it. His eyes had found the neural path logo, and I could see the wheels turning in his head, calculating just how wrong they'd all been. "Neural path," he whispered, his voice barely carrying over the noise. That's the biotech AI company, the drug discovery algorithm. He swallowed hard, his tan face going pale. "That's an $85 million exit." I stopped in front of Veronica, close enough to be heard without shouting. "You mentioned I couldn't afford you," I said, my voice carrying a calm satisfaction that surprised even me. "The fuel for this aircraft to fly up here from San Francisco cost $4,000. That's more than your father makes in a month from his wine distribution business. I had my people run his financials when you invited me. He's underwater, Veronica. Tell him to sell the vineyard before the creditors do it for him." Her face cycled through emotions like a broken slot machine. Confusion, recognition, horror, desperate calculation. "Damien, wait, I didn't know. If you'd told me..." "That's exactly the point," I cut her off. "You treated me like garbage because you thought I was poor. If you treated me with respect when you believed I was nobody, we'd be having a very different conversation right now." I walked toward the helicopter, the downdraft whipping my cheap Target shirt around me like a surrender flag. Harold was screaming something about property damage and calling the FAA, but his words were lost in the mechanical thunder. I climbed into the leather-appointed cabin, where Finn had a cold beer waiting and noise-canceling headphones ready. "Rough night, boss?" Finn asked with a knowing grin as he helped me with the headset. "Educational," I replied, settling into the seat that cost more than most people's cars. As we lifted off, I looked down through the window. The entire dinner party had rushed to the edge of the patio, phones out, recording the departure of the broke boyfriend who just revealed himself as anything but. Veronica stood alone at the center of the chaos, looking up at the aircraft that represented everything she thought she wanted but had just thrown away. We banked hard over the valley, the lights of Napa shrinking below us as we headed back towards San Francisco. 4 months later, Harold filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Turns out when you alienate someone with connections throughout Silicon Valley's venture capital community, word travels fast. My casual mention to Fletcher at Pinnacle Ventures about Harold's questionable financial representations killed his last hope of a bailout deal. The estate rental company also sued him for lawn damage caused by unauthorized aircraft operations. I paid that fine personally, worth every penny. Veronica disappeared from the Bay Area social scene entirely. Last I heard, she was in Portland, working at a boutique PR firm and dating a car dealership manager who thinks Olive Garden is fine dining. Julian, to his credit, never tried to contact me. Professional courtesy among the financially literate. As for me, I bought a Porsche 911, not to show off, but because I was tired of pretending I couldn't afford nice things. But I still frequent the dive bar in Oakland on Tuesdays for their wing special. Still wear Hanes t-shirts, still prefer authenticity over flash. 3 months ago, I met Grace at a bookstore in Berkeley. She's a pediatric nurse who drives a Honda Civic and splits appetizers to make them last. When I offered to buy coffee, she insisted on paying, saying I looked like a grad student who probably survived on ramen. I didn't correct her assumption. We've been together ever since, and she still doesn't know about the money. She loves Damien the person, not Damien the portfolio. That's worth more than any algorithm I ever designed. Sometimes the most expensive thing you can buy is knowing what someone would do if they thought you had nothing. The answer tells you everything about who they really are, and who deserves a place in the life you're actually building.